Honourable Minister of State for Democratic Reform.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and a special thanks to the member who raised this motion and given us the opportunity to discuss our democracy and the various ideas on how to improve it. In order to talk about this proposal, we need to discuss the broader context in which it is inserted into the debate. So let us start with the broad strokes of Canadian democracy. By recognizing that everything great that has been achieved in this country has been done through gradual, incremental improvement, starting 800 years ago with the Magna Carta, which we will celebrate next year. We'll celebrate the 8th century anniversary of the Magna Carta. Yes, you can applaud that. And I want to invite this one member, to interrupt my comments with his applause at any time throughout, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I won't go through each of the 800 years, but I will state that, you know, in 1867, we actually got a country. It wasn't until 1931 that we got an independent foreign policy through the Statute of Westminster. And it wasn't until 125 years after Confederation that we got constitutional independence with the Constitution Act of that year. And so we have, in fact, there have been instances with the Statute of Westminster, for example, where the British mother country actually offered us more independence than we were prepared to accept. Which really speaks to the temperamentally conservative approach that Canadians have always taken to the evolution of their democracy. And we have built on that approach by making some important incremental improvements in our democracy under the leadership of the present-day Prime Minister. Let me give you some examples. In this Parliament, under this Conservative majority, we have passed more private members' bills than any other government since 1972. Wow. Now, private members' bills are proposed by backbench members of Parliament, not by the government, and they are supported by this government in order to pass into law. And the last time as many passed was 1972, when a large number were simply writing name changes. In this case, we're talking about substantive legislative changes that have done everything from protect vulnerable people from sex trafficking to cracking down on crime to countless other measures that improve the daily lives of Canadian citizens. Secondly, we've allowed vastly more free votes than has been the case of previous majority governments. Free votes are when members of a given caucus can decide how they want to vote regardless of what their party leadership tells them to do. And the Globe and Mail, along with Samara, a group that studies democracy, looked at 162 individually casted votes in the floor of the House of Commons and concluded that the Conservative caucus was far more likely during the 2-year period under examination to have members vote independent from their leadership than any other caucus in the House of Commons. The Liberals voted as a unanimous bloc 90% of the time. In the 2-year period under examination, the NDP voted as a unanimous bloc 100% of the time. In 4 votes cast in this House of Commons, the Conservatives had a member stand up and vote differently from the party leadership. So statistically speaking, our members are proven to be far more independent from their leadership, and our leadership exerts far less control over our caucus than is the case in other parties. We've also seen ideological litmus tests on the other side. The NDP saying that anybody who opposes the long gun registry should be removed from caucus, as happened to one member of Parliament from Northern Ontario. The Liberal leader saying that he would ban anybody who disagrees with him on the subject of abortion. These sorts of hard-line ideological litmus tests that ban anyone with a different point of view are a foreign concept in the Conservative caucus. which is, as I said, far more open. That speaks to sort of the culture of the caucus and the government of present day. But let's talk about the legislative initiatives. One, we passed the Fair Representation Act, which gives fast-growing provinces.
Honourable member for Toronto Danforth on a point of order.
Yeah, I think this is so obvious as not to need any articulation. We're going to have context setting right up until the end of 10 minutes. There has not been a word addressed to the motion, and the context of the motion is nothing but singing the praises of the Conservative Party. So I honestly do not believe that this is relevant.
Well, I appreciate the intervention on the member for Toronto Danforth. The member is only about a quarter of the way through the time that he has allocated for his remarks today. And so on points of order, on points of relevance, of course, one has to hear what the member has said before one can, most explicitly make a decision on that. I would say that the topic before the House today concerns matters of democratic reform, and I'm sure that the Honourable Minister of State will be, in his preamble, working towards how that may come around to address the question that's before the House. But I think we'll give him a bit more time to do that, and I'm sure he'll do that in due course. The Honourable Minister of State.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I see that the member was pleased to learn that I still have 2/3 of my speech left. And I think that I'll take just a few moments in setting the context to elaborate on an important piece of legislation that he and I both debated on the issue of democratic reform, which was the Fair Elections Act, which required people present ID when they vote, a new requirement in Canadian elections that removed the largely inaccurate voter information card as a form of ID. It brought independent investigations so that that an investigator can look into potential violations of the Canada election law without any interference from either a party or Elections Canada itself. We got rid of the ban on the early transmission of election results, which was no longer practical in the modern day environment. We used to ban in this country anybody reporting the election results in the East Coast before the end of the election in the West Coast, something that is not possible in the modern era of technology. We actually cracked down further on the power and influence of big money by closing the loans loophole that some politicians had used to get around donation limits, and banning dead donors, that is to say, people dying and leaving in their will or testament donations that were vastly larger than the donation limit, effectively allowing people to do in death what they were prohibited from doing in life. We got rid of dead donors in the Fair Elections Act. It was the biggest remake of our election laws in well over a decade, and according to publicly released polling data, it was overwhelmingly popular with Canadians. So that is a short summary of the context into which we now enter as we debate the proposal for a proportional representation system in Canada. One thing is I've always admired about our existing system, as distinct from the proportional one proposed by the NDP, is that each member in this place is accountable to an individual constituency, and there is not a single square inch in Canada that does not have an MP. So no matter where you live or who you are, you have a member of Parliament who you hire, or you help hire or help fire every 4 years. And that person is responsible to go back to your geographic area and represent your interests and values on a continuous basis. With a proportional system, that direct connection between Member of Parliament and citizen is obscured at best and broken at worst. In fact, this place is called the Commons because it represents the common people. It's colored green because the early commoners actually met in fields. And they would represent an area, almost always a geographic area, and they would take to the field with the values and interests of the commoners they represented. And over time, that has evolved into this very sophisticated and well-entrenched system of responsible government that relies on members of Parliament whose jobs are given and taken by the voters in their community. And I think we have been very well served in this country by that system. Proportional representation, by contrast, will inevitably lead to unstable and risky coalition governments that are constantly falling and re-emerging. And that would break the stability that Canadians have come to expect and demand from their governments. And I think that Canadians have clearly rejected coalition government. It wasn't so long ago, but back in late 2008, the NDP and Liberals joined with the separatist Bloc Québécois to form a coalition government against the wishes and the outcomes of the election that had only been held a few days earlier. And they came very close to forming a government by way of this coalition. It wasn't until a massive, potentially unprecedented backlash that they were forced to recede from that plan and actually allow the winning party to govern the country. Now, there's no question that if in the next election Canadians return a Conservative minority, that coalition would re-establish itself and they would attempt to take power in a coalition setting that they were not able to secure via a direct election. And Mr. Speaker, instead of using a proposed change to the electoral system to achieve that coalition government, I think that they should be honest in the coming election, that is their intention. I think NDP and Liberal candidates should go door to door and explain their plan for a coalition after the next election, and then let Canadians decide if they want that. I mean, if Canadians vote for it, that's one thing. But what they should not face is a group of parties pretending to run independent from one another, and then after the election's over, when the decision is out of the grasp of voters, doing exactly something different, as was the case in late 2008. Mr. Speaker, I think that if you look at the quality of life that we enjoy in Canada, and no matter what measurement you take on an international scale, the success of Canadian democracy and representing the values and interests of the people is really unsurpassed anywhere in the world. We inherit, I think, the greatest democratic system in the world, and that is parliamentary democracy. I think that regardless of where people come from around the world, they can cherish this democratic institution that we inherited from the British parliamentary tradition, and that our success is entirely founded on all of the attributes that system brings: responsible government, common law, limited government, economic freedom, all of the basic pillars of a free society that have allowed countries throughout our civilization to enjoy so much prosperity and so much well-being. So, Mr. Speaker, I look forward to working with members across the way to build on the success of that great tradition and hopefully day by day, step by step, making Canada's democracy even better. Thank you.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Edmonton Strathcona.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And through you, I would like to thank the Minister for his comments on this matter. Yes, he has brought forward a number of changes to the electoral system, of which Canadians were very upset about and expressed their disdain. Some of them we were able to beat back and not others. I am disappointed, Mr. Speaker, that the Minister chose not to discuss whatsoever the motion before the House today. And I would remind him, he speaks of responsible government. My ancestor, Father Confederation from New Brunswick, actually reluctantly became a Father Confederation because he wanted responsible government in this country. And Doug Bailey, the national president of Fair Vote Canada, has soundly supported proportional representation, saying it is not a system, it's a principle. And what does he say? It better supports our system of responsible government by better ensuring a majority in this House reflects the majority of voters. Well, Mr. Speaker, if I look at the outcome in Alberta, as my member previously mentioned, Conservatives in the last election won 66.8% of the vote, but 96% of the seats. NDP received 16.8% of the vote, only 4% of the seats. Saskatchewan is even more skewed. Conservatives won 56% of the vote, but 93% of the seats. How then does the minister think that his system, which he says he's willing to amend, which will better represent the views of Canadians, how then can he speak against the reforms we're bringing forward?
The Honourable Minister of State for Democratic Reform.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I did address those arguments in my speech. First of all, I believe that the system we have of first past the post has given Canada good, stable, democratic government and government that Canadians are comfortable with. In fact, there have been proposals similar to the one the NDP puts before us, offered in referendums in British Columbia, Ontario, and PEI, all of them rejected by the voters. I think there's a member across the way from the Liberal Party who pointed out that it was only in one riding in all of Ontario that the electors voted in favor of this proportional system that the NDP now proposes. Canadians do not consider this proposal to be a priority. They want us to use our existing democratic system to focus on jobs growth and long-term prosperity. And with our low-tax plan, that is exactly what we're doing.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Labrador.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm listening very attentively to the discussion in the House of Commons, simply because I think all of us want to see some democratic reform, and it's what we're hearing amongst our constituencies. So I appreciate the efforts of many members of Parliament to put forward different options for reform, but is this what Canadians want? Have we really consulted with Canadians? We know that what's being proposed today has been rejected by a number of ridings and provinces across Canada already. So my question to the government member is, will they support consultation on democratic reform for Canadians, where we hear what they want and how they want to reform our system? Is he prepared to do that? And also, on the motion that's here today, is this a free vote for government members? Are they voting as members of Parliament, or are they voting as a government?
The Honourable Minister of State for Democratic Reform.
Well, the question was about consultation. The member correctly points out that this particular proposal has received some consultation in 3 provinces where it was rejected by referenda of the people of British Columbia, Ontario, and PEI. Note that the motion does not actually call for a referendum. It just calls for the politicians in this place to impose this new system on Canadians through a single vote in the House of Commons, which I think is in itself undemocratic. But over here, we're not planning structural changes of this nature. Instead, our focus is on keeping taxes low, helping families get ahead with a new family tax cut, an increased universal child care benefit. Combined will give the average Canadian family with kids an extra $1,200 a year that they can spend on the priorities that matter to them. That will go to 100% of the families who have children in this country. That's 4 million families will be better off. Now, I think part of a democracy is letting Canadians vote on these types of proposals, and that's what they'll be able to do in the next election.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Wellington Halton Hills.
Mr. Speaker, one of the concerns I have with respect to the New Democrats' motion is that it might lead to the further concentration of power in party leaders' offices. This has long been a concern of mine. Parties and party leaders currently control the process of party nominations, and without the reform of this process of party nominations, my worry is that in a mixed member proportional representation system where a number of MPs are selected by the parties themselves, that without reforms to the party nomination process, we could see a further concentration of power in party leaders, and I think that would weaken this House and the very principles of responsible government.
The Honourable Minister of State for Democratic Reform.
Well, the member makes a very good point. Recently, he identified what I believe is a flaw in the Canada Elections Act, and the flaw he identified was that a leader must personally sign off on the candidacy of every single person who runs for his or her party. And that ensures that under the law, parties don't have the choice to select who within their organization would be best suited to approve candidacies. And that's something he has sought to fix with his proposed Reform Act, which is under examination at committee. So I congratulate him on his work on that. He is quite right that the proposal from the NDP would actually concentrate further the power of party leaders and backroom party operators. That is the opposite of what we want to achieve in our democracy.
All right. Question commentaire. The Honourable Member for Trinity Spadina.
Toronto Danforth, thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I'm sorry, that's the other guy.
Yeah,
Toronto Danforth.
that's the other guy. I think it's really important that we clear up some what's amounting to misinformation, and I won't call it disinformation. That the system of mixed member proportional is not the classic list PR with candidates appointed by central parties. Okay, nothing like that. We're talking about the example that was set out by the Law Commission of Canada. You elect local constituency MPs exactly as currently is the case. Whatever the percentage is, it could be 65% of the House of Commons will be made up that way. Everybody has a local, directly accountable MP. Then there are regional MPs who go to the House of Commons to create the balance to make sure that the parties are represented according to their popular vote. That's the system. Everybody is elected, and on the second list, people can determine who they want to vote for on the party list. So everything that has been coming from the other side, Mr. Speaker, is already a mischaracterization from both sides. So I wonder if my colleague, the minister, might want to clarify why he's not acknowledging that mixed member proportional is not the kind of PR system that he thought he was describing earlier.
Honourable Minister of State.
Mr. Speaker, the member acknowledges that there would have to be a list voted on by the citizen, but that list has to be established somehow. Somebody has to put the list together, and of course it would be the party apparatus and party leaders that would establish that list and give all of its priorities. So the vast majority of parliamentarians on that list would just be the hand-picked selection of party leaders. Now, in this party, we don't do that. We have locally nominated candidates who win the support of party members on the ground, and that makes us unique in this party. The others have been exercising a heavy hand to shut down legitimate contestants in their nomination races, and that is something that we've avoided in the Conservative Party, and we're very proud of the Democratic record of our Prime Minister. Thank you.
We have time for one more short question. The Honourable Member for Winnipeg North.
Very short, Mr. Speaker. I'm wondering if the member can indicate whether or not, as the question was earlier, will his caucus in fact be having a free vote on this issue? Given the preamble to his speech that he was giving, are they in favor of having a free vote on the issue?
The Honourable Minister of State.
I thank the member for that question. As I mentioned in my earlier remarks, the Globe and Mail did a study on that exact question and concluded that the Conservative Party was by far the most likely to have free and independent votes among all the parties in the House of Commons. Out of 162,000 individual votes cast by MPs, we had far more MPs vote independently from leadership than the other parties, which is very unusual given that we're on the government side of the House of Commons. But I think that this Prime Minister has shown his willingness to accept debate and robust exchange of ideas, even when they are not precisely aligned with his own. And that is one of the reasons why our government has been able to stay in such close contact with the values of everyday Canadians.